I wish to make a complaint.
Sorry, we're closing for lunch.
Never mind that, my lad. I wish to complain about this parrot what I purchased not half an hour ago from this very boutique.
Oh, yes, the Norwegian blue. What's wrong with it?
I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's dead. That's what's wrong with it.
Well, it's that time again. It's Friday. It's actually Wednesday when we're recording this, but it's the time for the Cutrone Zone. With me is the last Marxist, Chris Cutrone. I forgot to say track coach, but you know that's fading in my estimation. Chris, welcome back and thank you for continuing this effort. Today, I feel like I need to be debriefed and maybe educated after my interaction with Caleb Maupin and Peter Coffin last night. I found myself. I think I fell down on the job in defending Adorno a bit, but what did you make of that exchange?
Okay, I'm not even sure where to begin. I kind of want to begin almost where you guys were ending and then work our way back.
Okay.
Right, so this is Stalinism.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is a kind of neo-Stalinism, and China is taking the place that the Soviet Union used to occupy for Stalinists back in, I don't know, the 50s and 60s, right? And so it's very much of a piece with, you know, there's a lot of Marxist-Leninism out there. We've talked about that, a kind of neo-Stalinism, a kind of neo-Maoism, and a kind of a strange kind of Stalinism and Maoism that is willing to basically argue for the socialist bona fides of the capitalist rotor revisionist Chinese Communist Party and, you know, Communist China, which the Maoists themselves call fascist. The actual Maoists, right, call Xi Jinping's China and Deng Xiaoping's China fascist after the purge of the Gang of Four. And just a side note, you know, Susan Sontag, I'm not a fan, but she was right that Leni Riefenstahl photographed African tribespeople the way she photographed Aryan white people in Germany, that it was a fascist aesthetic, and that the fascist aesthetic had triumphed in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and also in communist China. She's right about that. And, you know, but for these guys, it's like, oh, well, this just shows how absurd the Frankfurt School and its influence has. I mean, she was kind of influenced by, you know, Marxism and maybe by the Frankfurt School to a certain extent. But, and, you know, she was a kind of an anti-communist, obviously, in making a statement like that. And as you know, rightly pointed out, you know, what's in my new book, you know, the Marxism and Politics book, I do quote that the white race is the cancer of human history. And she says, you know, Marx notwithstanding, she's like, well, you know, Marx doesn't justify the white race, and neither does women's liberation. Women's emancipation also doesn't justify the damage that European civilization has brought upon the world, and blah, 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 blah. So it's a kind of, you know, but I just thought, okay, so, and you ended on a note that you claim you want to do a follow-up with them on revolutionary defeatism. And I'll just start out very polemically in terms of what I mean by Stalinism. You know, they were talking about revolutionary defeatism. What they're really talking about is bourgeois defeatism. It's not revolutionary defeatism at all. In other words, there's a petty bourgeois democratic anti-imperialism that they are expressing. And that is the essence of Stalinism. It's the liquidation of proletarian socialism into petty bourgeois radical democracy. And that's why they like this kind of stuff. This kind of, you know, authoritarian, conformist, Bonapartist stuff. You know, state socialism, whatever you want to call it. State capitalism, it doesn't matter. You know, but that is what it's ultimately about. And so, you know, you would raise the question of, wasn't it important for the working class to remain critically minded in the Soviet Union? They wouldn't necessarily think so. right? Or it would be like, what kind of criticism? So I'm reminded of Adorno. Adorno said that in the Soviet Union and in the East more generally, the only criticism that was allowed was that people weren't being productive enough. Right? Now, of course, Doug, I don't think that it's good what you did to move it to value theory, because I don't think that that really captures the essence of it, and I prefer to keep it a political discussion. And because they were, basically able to dodge the issue with respect to the other quality of Stalinism, like how Stalinism liquidates Marxism into petty bourgeois democracy, nationalism. Meaning, China is leading the world to socialism because it's developing the means of production in China. Oh no, like that is not the point. It's a world historic problem. Right? And so I think Peter Coffin had said something like the issue of capitalism and communism is not like good guys versus bad guys, but the movement of history. And, China fits into the global capitalist order. So does, obviously, Putin's Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which they would also demand a bourgeois defeatism in a U.S. imperialist war against those countries. So is the old Soviet Union. So despite the fact that the Warsaw Pact generally was autarkic, tried to develop domestic production. And, Eastern Europe, they had IMF loans. Soviet Union, no. This is what, in many ways, it's a cause and effect problem. Like what destabilized Poland, what destabilized Yugoslavia, were these countries brought down by the IMF? I guess so, but not really. That's not really how it happens. They were part of the world global capitalist order in a way that Hillel Ticktin, he's a sort of a quasi-Trotskyist, ex-Trotskyist, kind of Marxist economist. He just said, the thing about the Soviet Union, it was a status quo power, meaning it was interested in preserving the status quo. Now, of course, China also became that. When did it do so? Was it when Nixon went to China? Was it when Mao allied with the United States against the Soviet Union? Because that's what that was about. And the US and China cooperated in African civil wars against Soviet-backed forces there, such as Cuba. People forget all this history. It's just gone. And so I just thought, okay, so if China's leading the world to socialism, what are they going to make of the next major controversy within the Chinese Communist Party, which is inevitable, right? Struggle for power in the Chinese Communist Party. They're gonna pick sides. They're gonna say, oh, this one's the socialist, this other one's the capitalist rotor. It's all tailism. It's all tailism, and it's all tailism after capitalist politics. It is. And they would be doing that, which part of the Chinese Communist Party are you going to side with in the controversy? They're going to be doing what the capitalist politicians in Europe and the United States and Japan will also be doing. They'll be taking sides also. Right?
They'll probably just do the opposite, right?
Yeah, they might. They might not. In other words, strange bedfellows. Right? In other words, it did not trouble the Maoists in Mao's lifetime that the United States and Communist China were on the same side against the Soviet Union. It didn't trouble them at all. Right? So it's just funny how these things work out. So that's why it's not revolutionary defeatism. It's not leading the working class to power. It's bourgeois defeatism. It's tying the working class to capitalist politics. It's not even tying the working class to capitalist politics. It's tying the petty bourgeoisie to capitalist politics. That's why it's petty bourgeois democracy. Meaning, who's the audience? It's the petty bourgeoisie. They don't have a working class audience. There's no working class audience for this. No. There's absolutely not. Right? So this is all just an ideological struggle among petty bourgeois radicals There's nothing Marxist about it. Marxism, you guys talked about this, how Marxism itself can be turned into a cultural commodity, can be turned into an ideology to support the status quo. They're doing that. They're doing that. I mean, so is everybody, right? Potentially everybody. This is why I try to make Marxism as distasteful as possible.
Oh, I see.
Because I'm trying to keep the strangeness of Marxism forefront and say, look, you're not a Marxist. You're using Marxism to justify this or that capitalist politics. You're not willing to accept the challenge of Marxism, really. You're not willing to go there because you're going to say, oh, you know, Marx and Engels were good, except when they weren't good, when we disagree with them on this or that. Lenin was good, except when we disagree with him.
Well,
right? And it's going to boil down to the petty bourgeois radical democratic concerns of the present, the changing fortunes of what we like and what we don't like about Marx and Engels and Lenin.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell you what my strategy was going in to this. So first of all, I was going in keeping it in mind that I was talking to comrades, not political enemies. That's how I thought about approaching
that's
it.
Good. That's fine.
Yeah,
potentially political comrades.
Right. And so what I wanted to avoid was, an argument about how bad or good Stalin was, or what he meant, and rather to talk about the principles of proletarian politics or Marxism instead. I think that was what moved me to the value theory. I do think that was a mistake. I don't think that it helped. I got heated and
it wasn't effective. Yeah,
it didn't land. I wish I had gotten some of what was said afterwards into the conversation, because one of the things that Caleb said to me afterwards was he isn't really that interested in Marx or Lenin, but Stalin.
Yeah,
that Marx is like this neurotic European,
right?
Lenin.
Sure. Yeah. Lenin's too much an intellectual.
Right. And but Stalin gets it right.
I mean, let me put it in terms of the MAGA communism. I would put them in the MAGA communist camp, even if they're not even if they've had a falling out over branding. But like Infra Haas and Carlos Garrido, the MAGA part. Let's leave it aside. Let's just deal with the neo-stalinism of it, right? So, they basically say there are two histories to Marxism. There's the history of the struggle for proletarian socialist revolution, and then there's the struggle of socialist construction. And, they basically say you need both, but they do think, that Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, Caleb Maupin has written a book about why Americans should support North Korea, are the anti-imperialist bloc, right? And, the Green Party also does that. The Green Party, again, to just nail it on the petty bourgeois radicalism, the Green Party, their presidential candidates have gotten into trouble, not only for warming up to communist Cuba and socialist Bolivarian revolution Venezuela, but also North Korea. Over the years, over the decades, if we look at the history of the Green Party, not the Ralph Nader version, but the other version, right? They've been, and they've also obviously been associated with Bashar al-Assad, Syria, and also the Islamic Republic of Iran, and why? And why? It's not about who's funding them. It's not like that kind of shit. It's because they're looking for a lever against their enemy, which is U.S. imperialism. Meaning, like all petty bourgeois people, they are threatened Politically, it's not about what they get their income from. It's about their politics, these petty bourgeois, because they recognize the threat from capital. And then they're just like, okay, what can we use, or what can we try to use? What is countering the power of capital? And so they scour the earth for everyone who's like standing up to, resisting, blocking. And then, but the sad thing is that none of these countries are actually doing that. They're not doing
Well, yeah, well, I mean,
that's not happening.
there's-
It wasn't even happening in the Cold War.
right. I know, but it's certainly not happening now. But
Right.
what are they? How do they conceive of capital? I mean, that's why I go to something like value theory, or that kind of thing. Is because I'm like, what are we talking?
The profit motive. In other words, these people are standing in the way of the raping of the earth for profit in their local domains.
For profit. But I got them to admit that private profit was not actually what capitalism was aimed at primarily, or that if you
it's structural. For them, it's structural, right? So basically the idea is the means of production were developed by profit seeking until profit seeking became counterproductive for developing the means of production. Right? So they basically understand bourgeois society as mercantile profit motive. That's not what Adam Smith thought, by the way. He thought the profit motive and mercantilism got in the way of bourgeois society and of actually developing social production. And so that's the idea, is that it was progressive up to a point. The profit motive was a socially progressive principle until it wasn't. Right? And that's why they will, maybe in some ways like you, focus on things like the falling rate of profit. Crisis of overproduction, I've heard Caleb Maupin talk about this. He thinks it's about the overproduction of goods in a kind of, market glut, right? And,
well, yeah, but that's not what I'm saying. Right?
Certainly not what you're saying. And so they lose sight of the fact that it's an overproduction of capital, which might be concrete goods or it might not be, right? And also, it's really population, right? Overproduction of capital is overproduction of labor, of overproduction of labor capacity, and it's the surplus population. And they just so they completely the reason that they don't understand the Frankfurt School and Adorno is that Adorno is there, right? The dehumanization of capitalism, not because of commodification, but because of what it amounts to in industrial production, which is the devaluation of humanity, of labor, and of everything, really. Science, everything kind of falls in value, and so they get into like property relations and the purpose of production for use versus production for profit. And that's why I always harp on that look, it's both.
Right.
It's got to be both. Otherwise it won't work.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Value and use value, it's both. It's not one or the other, but they definitely fall into that. Go ahead.
As a flat-footed reader of Capital, Volume 1, I've learned, you have to have use value for you to have exchange value arise, and you can't make profit off of things that have no use, social use of some kind, whether they're newly invented uses or just absurdities like a pet rock. Nonetheless, it has to have had basically have a use value in a market for it to produce value. Okay, so the technical, what I learned in that conversation was that the theoretical differences that we have in our understanding of capitalism actually come second.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, it's not really about that. I mean, it is.
You can't throw Marx's Das Kapital at communist China and smash it that way.
Right.
You just can't.
And, right. Right. And but it was more. It's what you just said a moment ago about how Adorno was there when was experiencing directly the consequences of the dehumanization of society, the loss of value that was not, strictly speaking, capitalist value, and arising out of a capitalist production, for not profit so much as just the expansion of itself, would be how I put it. When he saw that in its consequences, and felt the loss, and I feel like these Peter and Caleb don't feel the loss that they.
No, they want productivity, and they want their discontent with neoliberalism is its austerity, right? So they're like, they want a high standard of living for the working class. Capitalism is not delivering that. And, it's devastating not only the working class, but the petty bourgeoisie. It is, we have been living under an austerity regime for more than 50 years, or 50-ish years, increasingly. At the same time that we've also been seeing what you invoked, massive increase in productivity. Neoliberalism did deliver a massive increase in productivity. And it also raised the standard of living of people around the world. A lot of that is in China alone, but throughout the world. Africa's improved. There are places that have stagnated, like the Middle East. But, India, there has been, globally, although a lot of it is China. A lot of it is China. And a lot of it is the Green Revolution. In other words, they did it by cheapening subsistence goods.
But even in China, that arose out of a relationship with Western capital. It was not that China, by its bootstraps, raised itself out of poverty.
I'm always thinking about the Great Leap Forward and all the people who died, and Adorno and Horkheimer saying, okay, maybe 12 or 20 million Chinese will die now, but then after that, no one will starve anymore.
Right.
And after all, everyone does die. In the end, everyone does die. And so maybe some people die quicker so that in the future people don't starve and aren't as wretched. They were just looking at it okay, fuck, Now, this is the thing about the socialist construction stuff. It's neither here nor there whether the Soviet Union and China today is socialist or not socialist, capitalist. Is it a model for revolution in the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a model for how we're going to achieve the overcoming of capitalism at a global scale, which has to be seizing the means of production? And the means of production are still in Europe, the United States, Japan. They are.
Mm-hmm.
At least some of them are. The general social intellect is still, China's still stealing intellectual property. Why?
Yeah. Also, the United States is the second largest producer of goods in the world after China.
All sorts of goods, though. Agricultural goods. I was driving, by the way, so I did a pilgrimage last weekend. I went to Eugene Debs' house in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Fazell, we took this trip that we were meaning to do for a long time. We finally did it. And, we're driving through the cornfields, and we're also seeing the wind farms, the windmills over the cornfields.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the soybean fields. And, the United States produces a lot of raw materials, too. Right? So they produce a lot of agricultural goods. Obviously, the U.S. produces oil, natural gas, this kind of stuff. And so that's a lot. But in terms of capital, right? What is capital? Because very quickly it's going to move in a direction of real capital versus fictitious capital. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this. Wall Street is here. Wall Street is here. And, the reason that China is not going to lead the world to socialism is that China's going to experience a crisis and collapse like the Soviet Union did. It will. So I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or in 30 years, but it's going to happen. The Soviet Union collapsed in a way that even Weimar Republic Germany didn't collapse. And that certainly Britain and France and Japan and the United States are not, they have never collapsed like that, and they're not going to collapse like that. The Soviet Union collapsed. And the reason why is that the bureaucracy at a certain point, this is Trotskyism, they just gave up the ghost. They were like, yeah, we can't pretend to be Marxists and socialists anymore, right? We got to save what we can here. And, the bureaucracy converted itself into a capitalist ruling class and into tin pot dictatorship like every developing country. But with a massive collapse, and human devastation in the former Soviet Union that you haven't seen in the countries that were developed historically as the center of global capitalism. You haven't seen that. You're not going to see that. There's still a huge peasantry in China. There's a lot of rural poverty. They're just not. Yeah, it's not going to play out, right?
I read about 15 million people live below the poverty line in China, according to U.S. Western propaganda.
Statistics. It's not like the Chinese Communist Party will deny that.
Right.
They won't.
No, but that's not a huge number for that nation either.
For the size of the country, no, of course. My feeling is that, look, liberal democracy, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem with the Soviet Union and with communist China is that it can't experience a crisis and recover with any kind of grace, because there isn't a political possibility. It's just all the bureaucrats are going to run for the hills, do what they can to save themselves. It's a kleptocracy. They're going to sell off as much as they have control over. They're going to emigrate. It's just going to completely implode in a way that the United States won't implode. Because there is, because there's private property. Because there's like small-time capitalism, and because what you were saying, there is a tradition of civil social freedom that is not entirely extinguished. It's getting there, but it's not entirely extinguished. So like the U.S. could suffer a major problem, but it's not going to be post-apocalyptic the way the former Soviet Union was for a while there. Because it really was. It was a wasteland. And that's unfortunately likely to happen in China.
Right, but what I'm most interested in with
especially
Caleb,
if they go autarkic. In other words, if they decouple from the United States. One of the reasons why they spent so long not decoupling from the United States is to prevent just that possibility.
Right. And look, and at the moment they are suffering some.
They looked at
trouble.
the fall of the Soviet Union and they're like, we don't want this to happen to us. They knew that it was a reality.
Right.
And they were like, we hitch ourselves to the United States and that will prevent that from happening. It will keep us honest and it will keep them honest.
Yeah. And I got the impression that the Chinese government has taken the capitalist road, as you said, like that. They're not making a lot of overtures to the past or trying to return to.
Why do they have to say that they're going to achieve socialism in 2050 or something, right? Because they do say that, right? Why do they do that? That's just to keep the Communist Party going, right? In other words, you can't recruit people, you can't reproduce the Communist Party if everybody knows, look, this socialism thing is just not really what we're doing. Because there's a brain drain. Now, I can tell you, all my Chinese students want to move to the United States. They don't want to go back to China. They don't. Right? And that's a real problem for China. It's a real problem for the Chinese Communist Party. Its political rule is threatened by that. And so they have to, they're probably not keeping their best. But they have to keep some people, and to keep some people, they have to claim that we're doing this socialist thing. Otherwise, why does the Chinese Communist Party need to exist?
Well,
if
as
doing
a
socialism, why are they a communist party? What is that? Because it's not like North Korea. It's not a bunker state quite the same way, you know?
Yeah, but why is it, for just from the point of view of Caleb and Peter, rather than the Chinese communists themselves, would they still be holding this position if it was simply just Russia and Iran and North Korea, and that China was not?
They probably would, because they'd be looking for, again, some kind of resistance to U.S. imperialism. And I mean, that's a different matter. I mean, it's a very complex, the point of the matter is that this is a complex world that we live in with a complex history. And the complexity of that history is demoralizing. In other words, you kind of look at this mess and you're just like, fuck. Like, like the largest country on the planet is ruled by Marxists, supposedly, and yet it's capitalism to the max at a global scale, right? And, it's a very complicated history. Stalinism is just like, look, and because people will say, oh, what does Chris Cutrone want? Does he want them to abandon socialist construction just because the world revolution didn't happen? No, it's fine. Whatever. These things happen, right? Ideologies happen. It's fine. But here, if we're trying to struggle for socialism here, why are we looking to China? Right? It's, in other words, I'm not interested in like bad-mouthing China or wishing ill of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, certainly not wishing ill of the people of China, certainly not, but not even wishing ill of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not. But it's neither here nor there. We have to struggle for socialism here. And as soon as we do, we're going to find that we have a lot of followers in China. And guess what? They're going to be arrested.
Oh, I agree.
Okay.
But the thing about, back to Caleb and Peter, just what I
they
found
leave all that out.
Well, but
that's just gone. It's like, okay, so you want U.S. troops to refuse to fight China, towards what end?
Right.
Really, towards what end?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just to bring down the U.S. For what? Because there's no force here to achieve socialism.
Right. Okay. So first of all, though, I want to go back to this idea that, Stalinism is better than Lenin and Marx, right? That according to Maupin, and I'm not, I mean, he kind of agreed he would go into that with me in the next stream. So, he's not going to hide
How much
that.
of a confession? This is typical. This is normal.
Right.
No, this is what Stalinists and Maoists think. They think Stalin improved on Lenin, Lenin improved on Marx, Stalin improved on Lenin, and Mao improved on Stalin. It's very straightforward.
Right.
There's no secret. Like, it's just...
Yeah, but you combine that with you not having to defend it, that claim, by understanding the theory, particularly, or being consistent with the theory.
Well, the basic theory
demagoguing your way through. There's a.
I don't know if it's demagoguing exactly.
I'm trying to raise this. Let me just raise this thought.
Yeah.
With Caleb and to some degree with Peter, there's this desire for things to be very simple. That's why to turn to socialist realism and the rejection of abstraction is part and parcel of this desire for things to be simple and for things to be clear. The clearest thing is the orders that you receive and understand from an authority, and the anti-intellectualism really runs very deep, and I think it explains why they.
I mean, I'm sure they're not going to be happy with my books, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they might be happy with some of it, but not a lot of it. They'd be like, more or less useful, more or less useless.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the anti-intellectualism, I mean, it's a tricky thing. It's not like we can hang our hat there exactly, because I'm not sure how much intellectualism we need to restart a socialist movement in the United States right now. I think that we need to demystify, disenchant. I mean, again, their argument about the Frankfurt School is that whether the Frankfurt School intended it or not, the thinkers of the Frankfurt School contributed to a mystification of Marxism, and that Marxism is very straightforward. It's about property relations regarding the means of production, and it's about progress in the means of production versus retarding or holding back the means of production. And that's the basic point. And so you can talk about everything else about Marxism, but you can't talk about that. Because that challenges the ruling class, and it challenges the underlying principle of this society, the purpose of this society. So Caleb Maupin is like, why should Americans fight for a system that is just about the profit motive and not about human needs? And, look, Eugene Debs might have said something very similar. But Eugene Debs was talking to a different audience in a different time. Whereas now, I also had in the back of my mind, I had Conrad Hamilton. Sublation socialism, okay? That's your brand, Doug. Sublation socialism is run by Conrad Hamilton. And the idea is that, Mao did better than Stalin. Deng Xiaoping also did better than Mao and was in continuity with Mao. And Xi Jinping is even doing better. Right? So it's a kind of like a weird celebration of success, I guess. They've kind of figured it out. They've kind of gotten the formula right, to increase the means of production. Because at the end of the day, they do think it's a kind of an objective process. I would say there's an objective process of catastrophe. I'm an Adornoite, They would say there's an objective process of progress, of social progress. And once you do that, then you can just find a justification for that anywhere. You can say, objectively, the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite its crazy reactionary Islamic fundamentalist ideology, is a force for progress objectively because it prevents the US from riding roughshod over the Middle East in the profit motive. Right? And in order to keep themselves in power, they have to serve their people. That's the petty bourgeois democracy. Right? So, yeah, if you held a liberal democratic election tomorrow, you might have a color revolution in Iran, and so they'd be against that. Right? But they would basically say, as undemocratic as the Islamic Republic seems to be, or communist China seems to be, they are democratic because, after all, they're serving the people, if only for protecting them against Wall Street. Oliver Stone might agree. All sorts of people might agree. Noam Chomsky might agree.
Oh, I don't know. Would he? Maybe.
He might, because, again, the lowest common denominator of all this is petty bourgeois democracy, anti-imperialism. Smedley Butler, right? I was a goon for Wall Street throughout my entire military career. War is a racket. I upheld, Wall Street's interests in all these different countries that I, was sent to as a member of the U.S. military. Fine. But guess what? That's not Marxism, and that's not socialism, and it certainly isn't proletarian socialism. That's just straightforward, petty bourgeois, democratic, anti-imperialism. Now, again, that's all well and good. In and of itself, though, it's not so good. But if that sentiment, if that impulse were led by a proletarian socialist movement, of course, that's good. In other words, that will be necessary in achieving a socialist revolution. But what we're talking about is intellectuals. We're talking about people, young people, interested in ideas. Like Caleb Maupin, he's a communist because he read Marx. Right? That makes you an intellectual. Like, if you become a socialist by reading something, not by participating in some social political organizing, reading something, and reading an abstruse thing. Let's just be real. Like, there are socialist pamphlets Then there's Marx and Engels. Even the fucking Communist Manifesto is rarefied. It's totally bizarre. You are an intellectual. If that gets you, you're an intellectual. So that's who they're talking to. And they're basically saying, you just have to wish that China will prevail in the objective historical process. Other than that, you know, and you want to help the people who are gumming up the works of U.S. imperialism here. Like you want to support the protesters on the street who somehow make it more difficult for the U.S. to conduct wars. No, it hasn't done a damn thing. We've just gone through this. It did nothing to prevent the war on terror. It did nothing to prevent the Vietnam War. Nothing at all to prevent these horrors. None of it. It never does. But they imagine that it does.
Well, okay, I want to return, because I had this thought, and I want to see if I can get you to address it a little bit differently.
There were huge portions of the capitalist class who opposed the Vietnam War. Didn't George Kennan oppose the Vietnam War? Like some of these Cold War architects opposed the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
You know? There were people, the capitalist ruling class, the deep state bureaucracy, there were people who opposed the war on terror.
Yes, there
didn't stop it. It didn't. None of it stopped. Like
today, there are clear representatives of the elite capitalist political class, John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs, who are opposing the U.S. policies in Ukraine and
Israel,
Gaza.
Yep.
And you know, and they make compelling arguments at times, but do they make those arguments within a certain worldview, a realist worldview in the case of Mearsheimer? And it's worth noting what that worldview is. I wanted to say, you said something that
Mearsheimer, who, by the way, said that his candidate for president in 2016 and 2020 was Bernie Sanders. Why? Because the U.S. needs some social democracy. The U.S. is falling apart.
Yeah, for the same reason that maybe Sohrab, if he didn't have so much trouble with drag queens, would support.
Yeah, or Konrad Adenauer, who was the Christian democratic leader of Germany for most of the time immediately after World War II. He built the welfare state.
Right. No, but I want to say this, this thing. I want to get to this point, which is that you said that you can't organize the working class on the basis of critique or being open to thinking beyond what's given, or based on appealing to their intellects. I mean, you didn't say
I wasn't saying that. No, I was saying, look, I'm not making the reverse argument. I'm making one argument, which is that, look, I'm from a working class background. I still work for a proletarian wage. I'm married to a worker. You know, I'm an intellectual. You know, and I'm a petty bourgeois intellectual, and not because I was educated at the ruling class's institutions. Because I've seen the left. I've seen the Marxist-Leninist organizations. I've seen, you know, how they educate people. It's the same. You know, and the politics is ultimately the same. You know, it's not like inside the university versus outside the university. It's not any of that. It all basically amounts to the same thing. You can, you know, set up an underground. Yeah, the Situationist International. They weren't at the university. It's still petty bourgeois. I mean, some of them. Obviously, T.J. Clark ended up in the university, but Guy Debord did not. Right, so it doesn't matter. That's not really the point. It's not about like funding or who the ruling class supports and their institutions. You know, it's not that. It's about, look, these ideas are ideas, and we're not having a critical thought about a proletarian socialist movement. We're having critical thoughts about a very wretched petty bourgeois left, an extremely wretched petty bourgeois left, the worst that it's been in 100 years. It's been pretty bad for 100 years, but it's bottoming out in a way.
I think it's worse now than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And it's also worse than it was when you and I were younger.
Yeah.
Which is sad. It's sad, right? Because I don't want to be a nostalgic for the 80s and 90s. No.
Yeah.
No.
Certainly not for the left in the 80s and 90s.
No, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, like, in our lifetime, we've seen a deterioration, but not because anything in our lifetime has been any good.
Right. But what I want to say is, like, when I said to them, look, there's a tradition of freedom in the United States that you can, appeal to people on that basis, and that people are likely to resist authoritarian forms of government and, who will want to dissent. And there's a tradition of dissent in the United States. And I think it's based on, despite our anti-intellectual tradition as well, I think it's based on a trust of ideas, of thinking, of trying to develop.
Of people's ability to reason. I mean, yeah, and of course, Adorno, that was the other thing that they attacked Adorno for, which I thought was really unfortunate.
The anti-Americanism.
Well, no, it was that had more to do with, like, the ruling class, whatever you want to call it, right? That's fine, right? It wasn't anti-Americanism. I mean, I think that very early in your discussion with them, Caleb Maupin said it used to be a requirement of Communist Party members that they know all 4 verses of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Right.
And you were a little shocked by that.
Well, I just didn't know that. I wasn't shocked by it.
It's just one of these things, right?
I don't know if I know all. I don't think I do know all 4 verses.
No, I don't either. And, and it's funny because the Star-Spangled Banner is kind of like, whatever, it's the War of 1812. I mean, it is the Napoleonic Wars. It is the U.S. was attacked by Great Britain because the U.S. was too pro-Napoleonic France. So, we were on the side of global revolution against the side of counter-revolution, and the counter-revolution came knocking and burned down Washington, D.C., right? And so, it's fine. Star-Spangled Banner is fine, But I think that back then, and coming out of the old Socialist Party tradition, the Communist Party was basically making the argument that socialism, communism, and the working class are more patriotic than the ruling class. And especially in a country like the United States, that's not a blood and soil country, but a revolutionary country. Right? This is a country founded on revolution, not founded on, some tribal displacements. I mean, I know that people will say, oh, but what about the Native Americans? What about the transatlantic slave trade? Okay. But there was also a revolution. Right? And so that was the reason. The reason is communists should know the Star-Spangled Banner in a way that the lackeys of the ruling class don't. They don't know all the lyrics. We communists do. So take that. Right? And, so that's cool. That's fine. I mean, I don't know how relevant that is right now. I mean, I don't know, but that, so it's not anti-Americanism. I think that there's a
no, but they were accusing Adorno of anti-Americanism.
They were basically okay. So the thing about Adorno is that they were saying that Adorno was saying, and it's funny that he picked up the authoritarian personality right away. So I'm teaching that now to my social worker PhD students, and I was just teaching Wilhelm Reich. So
I felt like I fell down exactly at that point when I refused to defend the authoritarian personality.
I mean, I'm not sure. It's a funny Aesopian book, right? I mean, it's good, but then, Platypus published another piece that had not been published by Adorno in his lifetime, Remarks on the Authoritarian Personality, and I wrote an essay on it, Critical Authoritarianism, published when Trump was elected, but before I knew Trump was actually elected. And he clarifies a lot. In other words, he clarifies this kind of misapprehension. So it's not that he was saying that the working class is, not a revolutionary agent for socialism because it's authoritarian and it's fascist. Also, by the way, the Susan Sontag bit. about like, okay, maybe the communist countries are the last holdout of a fascist culture. Again, it's neither here nor there. Like Leni Riefenstahl, whatever, right? She romanticized the white Aryan beautiful people. She romanticized the black African beautiful people. Fine, you know? But it's not like, oh, well, Susan Sontag and the Frankfurt School are against that because they're against like health and beauty and strength. No, it's that it's a kind of a lie. In other words, like neither Nazi Germany nor the holdout tribes of Africa really did represent health, beauty, and strength in the capitalist world. You know, it's a pure romanticization. And, you know, that's the problem with it. And also all the, you know, choreography, you know, gymnastics, the perfectly orchestrated military parades. How representative is that? Like when North Korea puts on a military parade, how representative of the actual physical well-being of the population of North Korea is that spectacle? It's not. I'm sorry. You know, and so it's a lie. That's the problem. The problem is not health, beauty, strength. The problem is that it's a lie.
Right.
No, I mean, that's the problem. In other words, you know, the untouched, beautiful, unspoiled, naked, glistening black bodies in Africa, that's not the reality of Africa in the middle 20th century. It's not representative, you know? And the fact that Leni Riefenstahl was like, I want to find the untouched, unspoiled, pure human people, that's a twisted ideology. It's a lie.
Right.
You know, why is that more important than representing, you know, the vast majority of the African population struggling in capitalism? Where's the heroism of that? That's the heroism, not these innocent tribes that are about to be wiped out by capitalism.
Right.
You know, who can still go naked unashamed because they haven't been, you know, immiserated and destroyed by capitalism. They haven't had their bodies broken by capitalism yet. You know, I mean, you know, so again, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, sure, the postal murals, post office murals, the WPA project murals showing the working class as like virile, strong, healthy. I mean, was that the working class in the 1930s in the United States? No. Come on. So it's a lie. And of course the government funded that, not because FDR was a populist who was quasi-socialist, but because it's a lie. That's why they did. Right. And that's true of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and Communist China. It's all a lie. That's the problem with it. And they, you know, and Adorno's there to say it's a lie. And what, you can't say that because that's going to like undermine the struggle for socialism? If the struggle for socialism can be undermined by someone saying that government propaganda is a lie, then how strong is the struggle for socialism really? How vital? Right.
And this gets to what I wanted to kind of softly object to, and something that I thought I heard you say, which was that you can't organize the working class on an intellectual basis. And for me, the intellectual basis, I mean, I'm not an academic. I don't know. I know what I know at 53 is just the depth of my own ignorance, most of all, right? So, but
you have wisdom.
Yeah, but yeah, right. But the what I do believe is that by holding to an intellectual approach, or you know, the right to free speech, a critical approach, you are there by giving yourself the freedom to call a lie when you think it is a lie, and that freedom is absolutely necessary, I think, for any working class struggle to emerge.
I mean, look, the Soviet Union supported avant-garde art and literature in the early years because it thought it could afford to. It was repressed. Artists and writers were killed. They had their work banned.
Yeah.
Also were imprisoned. They also were put in mental institutions, and they were also killed because they were accused of demoralizing people, of spreading unhealthy psychological attitudes, right? And that's what, they're saying, well, what's the role of this art? If the role of this art is to put people in touch, because they were saying, well, the CIA was funding this art with a reason, because they did psychological studies, and like looking at abstract expressionist art makes you more fucked up, right? As opposed to looking at socialist realist painting, which I guess makes you more manly, virile, healthy, something. And it's just like, I mean, I can tell you, in the East, in the communist countries, art was banned, artists were repressed, and even like physically punished and killed for spreading unhealthy psychology. And they were basically saying the art, it puts people in a bad mood. It's a down, right? And you don't want that when you're building socialism, or when you're trying to, organize the working class positively, whatever they think they're doing, and it's like, no, right? Because yes, I mean, generally speaking, do we want every worker to become a connoisseur of modernist art and literature? No, that's not the proposition, though. Right?
Yeah, no.
That's the proposition. It's not like, there should be no, like, I don't know what, Bruce Willis, like, action hero, like, Die Hard type fucking awesome movie. I mean, I love that.
John Wick.
Yeah, I love that shit. It's great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm sorry, the working class is suffering. It is disturbed. It is troubled by capitalism. And you're going to deny them the ability to objectify those experiences, those feelings?
Mm-hmm.
Right? In other words, you're going to say, oh no, pay no attention to how awful you feel in capitalism. Just man up. Become a communist, struggle for socialism. It's like, it work that way. Like, I don't know. CS, like what is it? Upton Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
How uplifting was that?
Not very. But it was funny. It was funny, to sometimes. But
it's not uplifting, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
And, but it would never have occurred to anyone to say this is an impediment to the working class's struggle for socialism. But the Stalinists did say that. And they didn't only say it in the Soviet Union, they said it in the United States.
Right. And, I think I was confusing up. I'm going to cut this out. I think that he wrote The Jungle, but there was another book, I thought, by Upton Sinclair that I had read.
Oh, he has a bunch of.
Yeah, but I think I was thinking something else. Anyway, skipping ahead there. This is what I mean by the depth of my ignorance. The things I forgot.
Socialist, of course. He actually stayed at Debs' house, it turns out.
Right. But I wanted to. Okay, I'm going to flash this on the screen for a second. So.
Oh yeah.
I showed this to Caleb and Peter to demonstrate that you didn't have to be a CIA-funded, decadent bourgeois stooge to be attracted to abstraction in art. And I don't think that particular work is depressing.
It's weird. It's weird. It's to render the Russian Civil War as a geometrical abstraction is weird. It's like, human bodies being trampled underfoot in mechanized warfare, reduced to a white circle and a red wedge. It's a little weird, a little creepy, a little strange. Like, in other words, it kind of can go here or there. I mean, the futurists got on board with the Russian Revolution. They also got on board with Mussolini fascism.
True.
Okay.
But I don't see that red triangle as necessarily representing.
It's the Red Army. That's the Red Army.
I know. It's the Red Army, but
that's human beings being torn to pieces.
Is
but
it red
it's a red wedge.
Is it red because they were torn to pieces, or is it red?
No, it's red because it's communist, right? But what I'm saying is there is something. I mean, it's fine. That's a great painting. I mean, it's important in the history of art. I'm neither for nor against it, really. I think it's an interesting expression of a moment, right? In which an otherwise quite insular aesthetic impulse, geometrical abstraction, was attempted to be married to a political project. And, I would just channel Adorno. There's something very self-contradictory about that painting, as with all art in this era, right? But there's something, maybe in a pointed way, right? So, by the way, Moishe Postone loved that painting. He hated the Russian Revolution and Lenin, but he loved that painting. That painting was up. It was over the table at the place where we held the social theory workshop, which was his graduate workshop. And I was, because he would rail against me, against my Leninism, and over his head was that painting. And who put that painting there? Moishe himself.
Right.
Right? And it's like, come on, And he loved the painting for its aesthetic. But can you separate its aesthetic from its politics? You can't really.
No, of course you can't. No.
But if it was a fascist painting, then we would say, oh my God, it's the reduction of human beings to geometrical formations. Walter Benjamin's work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. His quotation of the Futurist Manifesto at the end, in the epilogue. Right?
Well, look, just on that level, speaks to the contradictory nature of capitalism itself, which is liberatory in the way it reduces us to mere abstractions, right? It breaks by being workers who can work any task, do anything that they can get hired to do, and remain.
It also doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, meaning it is. Meaning we do have a kind of post-human, transhumanist imagination that's activated. It's there. And it's there.
But I'm saying it is good and bad because that abstraction is both our dehumanization. It's a reduction of our values to just an abstract exchange value. It is letting go of the sensuous side of our experience.
It's an
also an expression of freedom, yeah.
And it's the pathos of that painting for me is knowing where it all led. Right? Okay, the Reds won in the Civil War. But did it bring the world socialism? It did not. So there's a sadness for me. There's a pathos. There's a tragic character to that painting. That might not have been intended, but was also the case in the moment. El Lissitzky and, these kinds of artists, is that, which artist is that? Is that one?
That's Lissitzky, yeah.
It is El Lissitzky, okay. So that's what I thought. And, there's a pathos. I feel like at some level, he was aware of the tragedy. And it was probably a Hegelian tragedy. Meaning, the revolution is tragic and it involves a monstrous sacrifice, hopefully the result of which is progress in freedom. But it wasn't. Right? And, a lot of that is up to history. Meaning, look, prove me wrong if China leads the world to socialism, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, it's fine. But in the meantime, what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for it to happen?
No, we're supposed to organize the workers to oppose the U.S. government.
Which just means getting behind whichever oppositional faction of the ruling class happens to disagree with U.S. policy at a given moment.
Right. Which at the moment is both and neither.
It's not the parties, it's within the parties. It cuts across the parties and it's in the deep state.
Okay.
Right? So, and also, look, is historical progress on the side of Israel or on the side of Hamas? Right? And I don't know. I really don't know. All that I know is neither is taking us to the struggle for proletarian socialism. Right? In other words, objectively, I have no idea. And we have to be prepared for any outcome. The ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, the destruction of the Zionist entity. We have to carry on the proletarian struggle for socialism regardless of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of who wins.
So if you were me and you're going to go back and talk about, continue to engage with them, and maybe I'll try to get Midwestern Marxist guys on and talk to them. Maybe I'll try to get Infrared to engage with me. And Conrad, of course, I can bring him back on anytime. Probably. I mean, he's a friend. How would you approach the neo-Stalinists? Because one of the things I noticed is that with Caleb is he's trained up. He's coming out of socialist party politics. He's not kidding around.
The Marxist sectarian left.
Yeah, he's of the sectarian left in a way that I am not. I mean, I was in a sectarian group for a little while in my 40s. I was never really fully in with any sectarian group.
They're a minimal version of it anyway. The Marxist humanists.
Yeah, they are right. They're the neurotic intellectuals. They're not like the serious sectarians. So I find that because of that training, which I kind of admire, he was very on script. He was
talking points.
Yeah, he had his talking points lined up. He was not thrown off by any objection.
But he's thought through things. I mean, he was flexible enough to go with the flow of the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm not
saying bring it back to some script. He didn't always bring it back to some script, but he did have an answer ready for everything that you brought up. So he's thought about it.
Right, which I should have had more answers ready.
But you know what? You might not have thought about it as much as he has. In fact, right? In terms of like the way of thinking. So he's thinking about why one should not denounce Stalinism. That's a starting point. Right? And therefore he's thinking about the rational justification for every Stalinist policy.
Right.
And he's prepared to defend it because he's challenged himself with it and he's come to agree with it. He's inhabited the rationality of it. He's decided that this is his task to uphold that, to uphold this tradition. And to not give an inch, again, with the imperialist propaganda. Right? And so that's why he has an answer for everything. And my... I could be like that. I decided a long time ago that's not my role. To have a justification for everything that people who call themselves communists did. That's just not my role.
Right.
And I mean, look, at the end of the day, people want to know what is to be done. And I mean, that's why maybe we'll wrap up this discussion where I began, which is, what are they telling people to do? They're telling people to defend the enemies of U.S. imperialism. They're telling people why everything U.S. imperialism does, every enemy that it has, every war that it wages is wrong. Right? So... don't believe the imperialist propaganda. And they're saying, look, Marxism is very straightforward. And
that's always alarm bells always go off for me when people say Marxism is very straightforward, by the way.
Yeah, I mean there is a way, obviously, I've mostly to provoke the left, but also to really provoke thinking. I am interested in how, classical liberal bourgeois revolutionary thought, because it was revolutionary, does continue in the socialist movement and in Marxism. And in emphasizing that. And, simply talking about the inadequacy of that kind of thinking to deal with the problem of capitalism, which is a deeper problem. But the problem of capitalism in the Marxist sense is unmotivated right now. Meaning, for Marx, he was concerned with how the working class was in the center of the historical dynamic of capitalist development in an active way as a subject of history through its struggle for socialism. And that's what Lenin was concerned with. That's what Trotsky was concerned with. It's also what the Frankfurt School remembered it was about. We don't have that now. Right? It's very obscure. It's very subterranean now. Like, capitalism is conditioned by what the working class does and doesn't do today, but more unconsciously. It's not like, you know, I mean, so they don't like cultural critique. Well, cultural critique is just ideology critique. But what ideology? Right? So what was the object of Marx's ideology critique? It was socialism as a bourgeois ideology. It's right there in the fucking manifesto. You know, they forget that. Right? They're like, why is Adorno talking about the workers' culture? Because Marxists have always been talking about that. They've always been talking about the working class's ideology. Marx was talking about that. He was critiquing proletarian socialism. Proudhon was a proletarian socialist, according to Marx. He was a worker communist, worker socialist. And Marx was like, I'm going to take that as my starting point. Not the ruling class.
Right.
Who cares what they think, really? They think some insanity. I mean, in the 19th century, they're monarchists, they're religious obscurantists, they're jacked up on all sorts of things. The ruling class is not the important bourgeois ideology. It isn't. Well, the important bourgeois ideology was the French revolutionary tradition in Europe that the working class upheld. You know?
Right.
And Marx's critique of that was not a debunking of it. It was just the limits of it and the self-contradictory character of it in capitalism. And so, you know, it just feel like, well, culture critique, but it is ideology critique. And it's not the ruling class ideology, it's the working class ideology. Because that's what matters.
Right.
Right? And not just to deprogram and re-educate the working class or something, but to take it as your starting point.
Right. Obviously, you're not just wanting to debunk the working class ideology that you encounter.
No.
But you're wanting to critique it in a camaraderie fashion in order to develop the thought.
And they stand for that, by the way. But I mean, that's where they have their ambivalence about MAGA communism, because they do want to take, you know, the healthy ideas of the working class as a starting point, right? So they'll kind of do that. They'll do some kind of like discrimination of the healthy and unhealthy ideas, or the social versus antisocial attitudes of the working class. So they'll want to go with, like, you know, their democratic impulses, and they'd be against their bigotry, their racism, their sexism, their homophobia, right? I mean, I think so.
I don't really know. I'm not sure.
I mean, Haas has been, you know, a little bit equivocal on that. I think the best he's been able to say is, because he had his conversation with Daniel Tutt, is that he doesn't want to blame the victims of capitalism. So he does think queers are victims of capitalism. He doesn't want to blame the victim. You know, but he doesn't want to uphold that as a healthy lifestyle either. And, you know, and he's all got, you know, healthy mind, healthy body, kind of his whole thing, right? Caleb Maupin might have that. Peter Coffin might have that. I don't know. I kind of think maybe not. And also, it doesn't seem to be so central for Haas, or for Carlos Garrido or anything else. They just don't want, like, heterosexual marriage and families to be stigmatized, and neither do I. Right. And so, you know, and you know, as a gay man, I maybe I'm a victim of capitalism. Maybe my perversion is like bourgeois decadence. Maybe it is. Whatever. Maybe I'm a victim that way. It's fine. You know what I mean? I just feel like, you know, I'm not harming anybody. You know? And maybe us victims should get together and have our little romances and be left to ourselves. And not be forced to conform, because that was the other thing. I kind of feel like, okay, what about all the people who can't do the rhythmic gymnastics? of like communist, public celebrations of the struggle for socialism? What about those people? What about the nerdy guys who are a little bit uncoordinated, who aren't so athletic? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you just gonna like sadistically bully them the way they are under capitalism? So there's a little bit of that. And I kind of feel like, no, they would say, oh no, you have to be compassionate and blah blah blah. But so but it's kind of like that's why they're just not interested in the cultural and psychological stuff, and I understand it because it can immediately become ass backwards. It can,
Right.
and I get it, and it's 60s stuff. It's counterculture. It is. It's antinomianism. It's like whatever the society stands for, I'm for the opposite. Yeah, that's bullshit. That's nonsense. That is. And that's not the basis for a struggle for socialism. I'll also say, of course, they're right that the people who are upset and voting for Trump because they're upset with American capitalism are like, it's those people that need to be organized in the struggle for socialism. That's true. I've written that myself, publicly around the Trump candidacy back in 2015, 2016. You're
not going to organize those people on the basis of Stalinism directly,
maybe some of them will get into it. I don't know. I mean, people are fickle ideologically. They might decide, communism is as American as apple pie, and MAGA communism. I just think, like I said, I don't think that that's the audience for this stuff.
Right.
I really don't. I think that the audience for this stuff is us. Is the same basically. There isn't like a social difference between me and Caleb Mockman.
Right.
He's talking to other people, and he's basically, would make the argument that people should become more like him and less like me.
I guess. I mean, he would say people should read what he reads and believe what he believes, and not
read what I read.
But he's not. He wouldn't be saying, "Don't live in Chicago. Don't be a gay man." He's not saying any of that.
Not like that. No. I'm talking about like, don't be this kind of Marxist over here.
Right.
Yeah. Be that other kind of Marxist over there. Woody Guthrie or something, right?
Right. Woody Guthrie. Who if he's who I like,
It's fine. It's like, well, Aphex Twin also is fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like one is bourgeois decadence and the other is healthy proletarian socialist.
Right. Yeah. I like Arlo Guthrie is what I think I told him. It's me in the
who was the son of Woody Guthrie, right?
Right. The son of Woody Guthrie.
More countercultural.
Yeah, right. I like Woody Guthrie too, obviously, but I actually raised on Arlo.
Right. Let's not forget that the new left came out of the old left. They're all red diaper babies. They're all steeped in the Stalinist culture, and yet they tuned in, turned on, and dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
Right.
And so there's ultimately, I just think that they do fall for this idea that, like, I don't know, modernism is enervating, and the counterculture is antisocial. Yeah, it is. Of course it is. But it's also not necessarily, And, they were being very frankly repressive. They were.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Gramsci, who's not part of the Frankfurt School by any means. You know who you forgot?
Who?
Lukács.
I said it. I did say it.
Oh, you did ultimately? Okay.
I did. I was like, oh my God, I can't. It was like, it was literally like, it was like not having,
It's like Korsch, and Korsch is totally obscure. Lukács is the well-known one.
Right.
And, but Lukács, and then they didn't really have much of a response to that. And then you're going to get into this other stuff, the good Lukács versus the bad Lukács. So the early Lukács is bad because he's more Frankfurt schooly, and the late Lukács
you can't just say like Adorno was not a Marxist, and you can't just say that the Frankfurt School was not born out of the tradition that the same tradition that Stalin was born out of. You know?
Yeah, they're rejecting the Frankfurt School that they encountered in school. And I understand, but it is just a little bit of a inversion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and, you know, if I had taught them Adorno, they may not feel the same way.
Right. And okay, well, all
they had
else
taken my class.
What I was really trying not to do in that conversation is react from in the way that I described in the little video, where it's like, oh, I have a visceral kind of emotional response to the authoritarianism on display in this conversation, and I'm going to rhetorically attack it. Like, and that was what I was trying to avoid doing.
Well, we do have to start with the authoritarianism of people. We do. In other words, it's not like, you know, because this is the progressive liberal Democrat misreading of Adorno, which is that you're going to discriminate between the authoritarians and the anti-authoritarians. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that people have done genetic studies. Some people are genetically predisposed to be liberal. Some are genetically predisposed to be conservative. Just the same way that some people are genetically presupposed to allow abortion rights, and some are genetically presupposed to be anti-abortion. And it's like, no. In other words, you can kind of viscerally have qualms about abortion and still support abortion rights.
Right. And
you can be anti-abortion and not give a shit about abortion itself.
The reason I didn't want to attack them rhetorically for the authoritarianism on display was because that would be authoritarian. Like I needed to hear out their arguments and not respond on an emotional ideological.
Stalin outlawed abortion. Do you think he cared about the lives of the unborn babies? No, he did not.
I think he cared about making sure that, well, I don't know. Well,
the population increased.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's enough workers to do the
and
job.
enough troops to fight the Nazis.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But he was also conceding
as well.
He was also conceding to the prevailing cultural attitudes and psychology of the masses, the peasants mostly.
Yeah.
You know, did Stalin care whether men had sex with other men? No, but he outlawed homosexuality anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's but people think that Adorno is saying there are like good people and bad people on like the authoritarian spectrum, and Caleb Maupin is there to say that's not Marxism. Marxism is not about psychology; it's about class. Oh yeah, of course, yes, that's true. I agree, right? And so they're saying, oh no, he's saying the working class is Adorno's saying the working class is authoritarian, therefore they're the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, the bad, and then they come back with, no, the bad guys are the profiteers of parasitic finance capital, the imperialists, right? Mm-hmm. Blah, blah, blah. And, so I it's kind of like there are just several different axes of disagreement, we might say, right? There's a little bit of apples and oranges, and there's a blurring for them of populism and proletarian socialism. There's a blurring of class, right? So if the enemy is big capital, then suddenly everybody else is a worker. But that's not Marxism.
Well, unless they're a barista.
Right. Or something, right? Yeah, no, it's just because I guess they're just like we talked about, they're the house slaves or something, and so they're
just the labor aristocracy doing service sector jobs off of the sweat and blood of the
third world.
Yeah,
and the migrant workers picking the crops and whatever.
Right.
No, I mean it's it's a mess, and so I think that there's no, the clearest that I can be about the problem with this neo-Stalinism is that it's picking off where Stalinism left off, which is the liquidation of proletarian socialism in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, it did happen. You know, the working class's struggle for socialism did come to an end, and that's why the only revolutions that happened subsequent were guerrilla armies, Tito partisans, you know, North Korean partisans, or Korean, because throughout the peninsula, Chinese partisans, Vietnamese partisans. You know, you don't have a working class revolution after 1917. You don't. And that's by the way, that's a real question for would-be Marxists.
Right.
How and why is that the case? Right? And so, straightforwardly, though, did I mention this to you? So Haas said, and also Gabriel Rockhill said, various of these neo-Stalinists have said, if you stick with Lenin's perspective, you have to conclude that the Russian Revolution was a failure. And I just think, well, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, in other words, I'm not going to pretend that the proletarian struggle for socialism somehow succeeded through guerrilla armies based in the peasantry and based on petty bourgeois radical intellectuals who pick up the gun. Fidel Castro, Che Guevara. These are petty bourgeois radicals. That's what they are. And their tactics flow from that. Picking up the gun. It's what we talked about with Hamas. Terrorism is petty bourgeois. It is. It is. You know, you get hard pressed to find the working class doing terrorism. It does not. The working class organizing itself doesn't do terrorism. The petty bourgeoisie being radicalized, they do terrorism. The D-class A high bourgeoisie, they do terrorism. It's entirely appropriate to their political outlook, to their horizon. What do they want? They want to get rid of the bad guys. They don't want to transform society. They want to get rid of the bad guys in the name of the good people who just remain this passive population. Terrorism means you don't have to organize the working class. Right? And sorry, but the guerrilla road is that. You know, if you want to know, like, with the Chinese Revolution, it was a military victory of one army over another army. And there would, you know, they'll look at the Elzovsitsky and they'll say, well, that's how the Russian Revolution succeeded. It was the Red Army versus the Whites. But not initially. That wasn't the point. The point was not to organize an army to defeat another army. The point was to transform society. The point was to avoid it being about armies. Armies? Right? Like, no. So, I mean, you know, but this is all just gone. And so now it's like, which army? I told you about Gretel and Theodore Adorno. Married couple didn't have children. So why didn't they have children? Because they were like, you never know what army they're going to be forced to fight in. These Stalinists, that's the only way they think.